Do you know why the Beatles are known as the band that created the modern album? Well, back in the 60s, when the Beatles burst into the scene, albums were basically nothing more than a collection of hits, with little to no connection between them. But with the release of albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles created a different type of album, one that gave every single song the same level of attention, discarding the idea of a single or highlights. The entire album had to be equally good. Because of this, deciding which is the best song out of a specific album is almost impossible. You'll often see people going on hour-long conversations about this topic and still not reach an agreement. However, almost impossible is not the same thing as impossible, and if you guys follow the channel, you know that I like nothing more than a challenge. I am incredibly excited for today's video, mainly because I know that a lot of you will have a lot to say in the comments section today. Today we have a good one. Basically, I'm going through the entirety of the discography of the Beatles, every single studio album released by the band, and I'm picking my favorite and my least favorite song out of each album. Now, this was extremely complicated for me to do. If you follow the channel, you probably know that the Beatles are my favorite band, and one of the main reasons for that to be the case is the fact that their albums are really well balanced. That they basically created the modern album by allowing each song to have protagonism inside of the record. So picking one out of the bunch and saying this is the best one and this is the worst one isn't really the best way to analyze the albums. However, I thought it would be a nice little activity, and I want you guys to leave me your own list down below in the comments. Believe me, I read every single comment. Sometimes I don't have the time to answer every single one of them, but believe me, I read them, so please do take the time because I'll definitely check it out. Now, picking the songs especially complicated when you go to the mid-60s and the late 60s with those incredible albums, but when you go to the early albums, you know, the Beatlemania albums is a lot easier, so easy that it's not really that interesting. So I thought, you know, maybe we have to set some rules in place. Number one, I think the most obvious one, is that we're not going to be counting any of the covers in the Beatlemania albums, mainly because the Beatles were known more than anything for their incredible songwriting ability. So I think that saying that the worst song on an album is a song that was not written by them is only obvious. You know, everyone's going to be expecting that to be the case. So to keep it a little bit more interesting, we're only going to be counting the original songs. Also, I feel like this is going to upset a lot of people, but I don't really care. Ringo is only going to have one song in this entire video. I feel like going for the Ringo song as the worst in each album is only like a safe option. There are some exceptions like Yellow Submarine and Revolver, or With a Little Help of My Friends and Sgt. Pepper, but apart from that, you know, in albums like Help, Rubber Soul, albums that basically redefined music and are some of the most popular, were some of the most popular in the UK in the 60s. Songs like What Goes On and, you know, Act Naturally are definitely not going to be at the same level as songs like I Need You, Yesterday, Help, If I Needed Someone. So I don't really think it would be interesting for me to say this is the worst song in the album when it wasn't even supposed to be the best song anyway. You know, it was just to give Ringo a song in the album. So we're not going to be counting any Ringo song. I'm only going to allow myself to do it once. Last but not least, I know this intro is being a little long, I'm sorry, but I feel like it's necessary to say that I'm not going to be counting songs like Maggie May, Dig It, Wild Honey Pie, What Are We Doing on the Road, because it's obvious that those are not really meant to be seen as songs inside of the album, just basically like transitional moments or interludes inside of the record, jam sessions even. So I don't feel like it would be interesting for me to use them as part of my options. And that's it. I have no more rules. I'm sorry this intro was so long. Let's go with the first album, Please Please Me. This was probably the most difficult album, mainly because the songwriting partnership of Paul McCartney and John Lennon was at an all-time high in this one, so deciding which song falls a little behind the others was really complicated. However, I came to the conclusion that the worst song in this album was There's a Place. I don't think this is a bad song. I actually enjoy my time with it in the album. However, even though it's beautifully performed by Paul McCartney, the instrumentation is quite colorful, I do feel like it's a little slower and more stale, you know, compared to the rest of the songs in this album, and I've said it multiple times on this channel. I feel like Please Please Me is one of the most entertaining albums of the Beatlemania years, one of the best albums to introduce your friends to the Beatles, so I feel like this song is definitely a low point, even if it's really enjoyable still, especially if you put it in the context of the album. As a standalone song, it's nothing too special, you know, it's definitely not the highlight of anything regarding Paul McCartney's songwriting career, but looking at the track list of Please Please Me, the consistency that John and Paul were enjoying at this time, it's only natural that, you know, even the worst song in the album is still still a pretty enjoyable song. And because that's the case, I had the same trouble picking the best song out of the album because I feel like a lot of people would go for I Saw Her Standing There. It's definitely the most iconic song in the album. You know, the intro, how it basically kicked the doors open for the Beatles to jump into the music industry. But for me, in my personal opinion, the best song in the album is the title track, Please Please Me. The identity of the Beatlemania years of the Beatles is basically Paul McCartney and John Lennon owning the music industry and destroying the competition, and I feel like there's no better song in this album and maybe in the entirety of the, Beatlemania records that shows that better than Please Please Me. I mean, the beautiful harmonies, the way that the song is so catchy, the melody being so attractive to the ears, it's so weird compared to many of the songs that were recorded at the time. A lot of people have this wrong idea that the Beatles were only special in their early years because of Beatlemania, because of what they managed to do in the US and the fact that they were able to write hit after hit after hit. But that's not the only thing. The music they were making was also very special, and Please Please Me is probably the best example of the melodic layer they, added on top of rock and roll music, which is basically why, even though I may appreciate some other song in this album a little bit more, I feel like the highlight of the album is Please Please Me, not only because of how good of a song it is, but also because of its importance, in the context surrounding the song. So yeah, now it's time to go for With the Beatles, and as a contrast to Please Please Me, it was actually very simple to pick my least favorite song in this album. As I said in the beginning of the video, I have one chance to pick a Ringo song, and I'm going to use my token right now because I Wanna Be Your Man is probably one of the worst things that came out of the Beatles discography, and I'm not even exaggerating. Like, I don't like this song, and even though With the Beatles has a lot of amazing tracks, like the one I'm going to talk about in a minute, in my opinion, one of the most romantic songs Paul McCartney ever wrote, I feel like this song alone manages to ruin a lot of the experience of the album for me, because even though I'm enjoying myself when I'm listening to Till There Was You, All My Loving, All I've Gotta Do, and some other incredible songs, I know that at one point in the album I'm going to encounter rock and roll music and I Wanna Be Your Man. I don't know why the vocals are so aggressively mixed. I don't know why the Beatles thought this song would fit an album like With the Beatles, but it doesn't. It's too aggressive. The percussion is so dry and so simple and bare. You can't feel the weight that percussion is supposed to add to a song. And then, production wise, the song is a mess. I feel like everything is all over the place. It's way too loud. It feels like an attack on the ears. So I definitely think it's the lowest point, not only of this album, but maybe of the entirety of the band's discography. But when it comes to the best song in the album, I feel like it's very obvious, not only to me, but to any fan of the Beatles, that All My Loving is the clear highlight of this album. I absolutely adore this romantic but playful version of Paul McCartney. This Beatlemania era where he wasn't using the sophisticated and elegant songwriting he would employ in the future in songs like Here, There, and Everywhere and Michelle, for example. He was allowing himself to be a little bit more playful and use catchy melodies with beautiful lyricism and communicate this sense of teenage love, in a sense that stands the test of time, really. You don't really need to be a teenager to enjoy a song like this because it has this cuteness surrounding it that makes it so wholesome in a way, and that's one of the main reasons people are so attracted to this song. I do believe that it's one of the best melodies he wrote in those early years of the band and the clear highlight in With the Beatles. Now it's time to go for the heavy hitters, the albums that redesigned the way albums were made, because almost every single song in the album has the exact same level of quality. It's time to go for A Hard Day's Night. Even though it took me a long time to decide if I wanted to pick this song as my least favorite for the album, I kind of always knew the ultimate answer was going to be yes, because even though I really do enjoy When I Get Home, I love the production, I love the heaviness of the bass, the guitar, and the drums. I love how energetic it is and how it fits so well into the concept of A Hard Day's Night. I feel like, this song is like the lowest point when it comes to how catchy the melody is, or, how well the voices blend together, when it comes to the harmonies, because you have songs like If I Fell, A Hard Day's Night, the title track, Can't Buy Me Love, I'll Be Back. You have so many incredible tracks that redefined the way John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote songs that I feel like if I were to put any other song as my least favorite, I would just be lying to myself. So yeah, When I Get Home is my least favorite out of Hard Day's Night, but believe me, it's still an incredible track. There were a few candidates for the best song on A Hard Day's Night. Can't Buy Me Love was one of them. album. I love the song and how fun it is and how it basically personifies Beatlemania. I love Paul McCartney's vocal performance in this song. I think it's really impressive, and I love how the themes were changing a little. Now it wasn't only about teenage love. There were also, more mature themes, even if they're dealt with the same teenage innocence that was used in previous albums. But ultimately, I think it's obvious that the decision of which song is the best one out of this album comes down to If I Fell and I Love Her, two of the most romantic and beautiful songs to come out of Paul McCartney and John Lennon's brain. Now, deciding which of the two is better is basically impossible. It comes down to preference because I believe both songs have the same merit. They're basically the exact same in terms of quality, so I don't really know how to give a proper answer. I can just tell you that in my opinion, And I Love Her was way more important for Paul McCartney than If I Fell was for John Lennon. John Lennon is not really known for being a ballads man. Actually, most of the time when he writes a romantic song, it seems to be from like a religious admiration point of view. He talks about women and the women he's dedicated the song to as a goddess, not really as a person he's in love with. Instead, this song, I think it's quintessential Paul McCartney. And I Love Her is exactly the same or really similar to almost every single other ballad Paul McCartney wrote. So I feel like this song meant a lot for the identity of Paul McCartney as a songwriter. Therefore, I'm going to pick this song over If I Fell. But if, both songs are basically the same in terms of, it's being the highlight of the album, it comes down to preference. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but the guitar solo, the way that the song feels so elegant and so sophisticated, Paul McCartney's beautiful but not overdone performance fits the song really well. And even though, the song doesn't really match the energy, the fun, playful energy of A Hard Day's Night, I feel like it's one of the best moments, not only in this album, but out of the band's entire discography. So I'm going to leave it as my favorite for A Hard Day's Night. When it comes to Beatles for Sale, I don't really want to waste too much time because I don't really feel like this album is that interesting. It's really enjoyable, and it does have a few lore pieces that are really interesting, but I feel like the quality is a little bit all over the place in this album, and the worst song in my opinion is I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. Now, I do enjoy this song. I feel like it's really fun and playful. I feel like the harmonies that Lennon and McCartney were using were very different from anything they did in previous albums. They weren't really trying to blend the voices. They were just trying to offer a contrast, and you'd see something very similar in songs like We Can Work It Out, for example, or Babies in Black in this same album. But it's basically a party song. I don't really feel like it has or it holds any sort of consequence to Paul McCartney and John Lennon's songwriting journey, so I'm going to pick it as my least favorite because every song by George Harrison and Ringo Starr in this album are definitely worse, but they're covers so they don't count. And when it comes to the best song, I know that a lot of people are going to be looking at Paul McCartney's I'll Follow the Sun, and I do understand that style is very McCartney-like. It was definitely a big step in the right direction for Paul McCartney in order to make songs like Here, There, and Everywhere and Michelle and She's Leaving Home. But I feel like Dylan's influence in I'm a Loser by John Lennon was way more important for his development as a songwriter. This was basically John Lennon transitioning into a more mature and serious songwriter. He was done with the party songs. He was done with Beatlemania. He wanted to do more autobiographical songs. And I'm a Loser, even though he said multiple times that the song is not really about him, it was basically him trying to copy Bob Dylan's storyline. I feel like it's very telling that it inspired or it basically sparked the flame that resulted in songs like Help, Girl, In My Life, and many other songs that do depict certain aspects of John Lennon's life. Once again, I do enjoy I'll Follow the Sun a little bit more, but I feel like the importance and the relevance that I'm a Loser had in John Lennon's songwriting journey makes it the highlight of the album for me. Now it's time to go for 1965's Help, and I have to say, we're seeing some gaps here, okay? Massive gaps in terms of quality, because the worst song in this album is Tell Me What You Say. I won't say I don't like the song because I don't really mind it, but it was around this time that the Beatles were starting to make some of the greatest songs of all time, so you were definitely expecting better songwriting, especially in an album that has the heavy nature of the percussion in Ticket to Ride, or the beautiful volume pedal used for the song I Need You. George Harrison was blooming as a songwriter, so I think we could have added another George Harrison song to the track list and removed Tell Me What You See. So I feel like it's such an underwhelming track instead of such a legendary album, then it deserves to be my pick for the least favorite song. And when it comes to my favorite, I feel like it's very obvious. You know, a lot of people will say that Help is the best song in this album. You're Going to Lose That Girl. It's also a really good candidate, but anyone with a brain can tell you that the impact that Yesterday had in the music industry is more than enough to make it the best song out of maybe any album by the band. The impact of Yesterday goes beyond the beauty and how simple the song is, you know, to the point where it's the most covered song of all time. It goes beyond all of that because the true impact, in my opinion, was showing the media and the fans that even though you were a rock and roll band known to make some of the most fun and enjoyable tracks of the 60s, you can still make tender, beautiful, and passionate music. Yesterday was the point where the media were sort of realizing, you know, the Beatles are not only a rock and roll band that sometimes makes ballads. The Beatles are something completely different, and they can do any sort of music and they're going to succeed. The following albums showed that even more, but I feel like Yesterday was the point where everyone started to look at the Beatles and say, you know, is this the best band of all time? Is this people going to continue to release great album after great album after great album? And because of the importance and how relevant this song was when it was released, I feel like it's, you know, a natural pick for my favorite song out of Help. And not only out of Help, but maybe out of the entirety of Paul McCartney's discography, this song is incredible. We're staying in 1965 though, because it's time to go for Rubber Soul. Now this was probably the easiest selection out of the whole video, because the clear low point in this album is Run for Your Life. I'm not even gonna talk about the lyrics because every single time I do, a lot of people get really flustered in the comments. Now that's weird. I don't know why that happens. You know, if an artist makes a song with questionable lyrics, you should be able to talk about it. You know, I've made videos on songs like Ringo Starr's You're 16 and You're Beautiful, or You're 16 and I Love You, and I'm not really sure, or the Rolling Stones making a song about slavery, and people get really triggered calling me a kid. They were different times, you just don't understand, but I don't give a fuck, buddy. It's weird. This sort of lyrics are not something I fuck with, and it's weird because it's in an album that I consider it to be one of the greatest of all time, but when I think about the lyrics, I honestly puke in my mouth a little. However, when you have a song like In My Life in that same album, All Sins Are Forgiven, you can go on with your life. I'm not even angry anymore because this is one of the most beautiful and one of the most important songs of 1965, especially, you know, for the Baroque movement. I know that a song like Norwegian Wood, it's also a really good candidate, not only because it's a great song, but also because it basically kick-started the experimental phase of the Beatles with the use of the sitar, the taboo themes in the lyrics, you know, the way that John Lennon and Paul McCartney dealt with the harmonies, the way that they're not trying to blend the voices together, as I said before, but act as a contrast to each other. You know, there's a lot of things about Norwegian Wood that make it a worthy opponent to In My Life, but the timeless energy and the beauty and how much of a classic In My Life is, it's more than enough for me to say that this is the best song in the album. You know, you also have basically the most relevant contribution that George Martin provided for the instrumentation of a song by the Beatles, you know, in that beautiful piano solo. The guitar work by George Harrison is amazing, and the very personal and vulnerable lyricism that John Lennon displays in this song is also a before and after for him as a songwriter. So even though I know that it's not the most important and maybe not the most impressive song out of the album, I do believe it's the clear highlight, and I know that a lot of you guys will agree with me anyway, so yeah. Revolver, an album that for a lot of you is the best one released by the band, so surely it was really difficult for me to pick my favorite and my least favorite because all of the songs are amazing. Well, no. It's actually very simple. Even though George Harrison was doing some incredible things around this time, some of the best songs he ever wrote were written around 1965, 1966, and you know, you have some incredible ones in this album too, like I Want to Tell You and Taxman, but he also made one of the most confusing, maybe the most confusing song released by the band because of how daring and bold of a move it was by him, you know, because Love You Too, even though I can understand what he was trying to do with the song, you know, even though I know that he was really deep into the Indian culture and, you know, the Indian classical music, I feel like he tried a little too hard with this song. You know, he was basically doing such heavy cultural tourism that it destroyed the basis of his songwriting practices. I do feel like the song matches the ideology behind Revolver, you know, how every song is supposed to be unique and experimental, and it's not even the weirdest song in the album because Tomorrow Never Knows is definitely more of a trip than Love You Too will ever be. However, I feel like, you know, it just doesn't fit George Harrison's voice. It doesn't fit an album by the Beatles. Maybe if he would have tried something similar in his old discography, I would be able to appreciate it a lot more. But inside of an album with so many incredible, groundbreaking, unique, and special songs like Revolver, to include a song like Love You Too was definitely a bold move. move. One that I appreciate, but I do find it to be the lowest point in the album. And for the best moment in the entire album, even though you have some incredible tracks by John Lennon, like Tomorrow Never Knows, I'm Only Sleeping, you do have Paul McCartney at his best with Eleanor Rigby, Got to Get You Into My Life. I feel like the highlight of this entire album, and maybe the romantic side of the Beatles as well, would be the beautiful, timeless masterpiece Here, There, and Everywhere. There are moments where you can't really explain the beauty of a song, and I feel like Here, There, and Everywhere is exactly that. You know, as someone that reviews music on the internet quite often, this is a song that intimidates me because I don't really know how to explain the beauty and how the effect this song has on the body. You know, I'm at a loss for words every time that I talk about songs like these because they are more than just songs. You know, they give you this peace of mind even though you're having a bad day, even though you may not be going through the best romantic situation. You know, they make you feel something very close, you know, something that mimics really well the feeling of being in love. And I feel like that's something only Paul McCartney is able to do so often and so effectively, and Here, There, and Everywhere is probably the, you know, the best example of that ability of his. I understand the political relevance of a song like Taxman. I know that no Beatle played on Eleanor Rigby, and that was the first in the history of the band, and I know how influential Tomorrow Never Knows was. However, I cannot explain and I cannot understand the beauty of Here, There, and Everywhere, and the moments where you don't know what's so attractive about something, that's when the attraction, it's at its peak, you know, at its most interesting, and that's the reason why I'm going to keep Here, There, and Everywhere as my favorite moment in Revolver. Okay, so I have to apologize here because I believe I said that the Revolver had the easiest picks, and I was wrong. Sgt. Pepper does, because Good Morning is not only one of the worst songs John Lennon ever wrote, I honestly believe it's the worst song out of the entirety of the band's discography. I'm not even gonna listen to any of you. I've read thousands of comments trying to explain why Good Morning is low-key the best song in Sgt. Pepper, but you have to be delusional to pick a song like this over A Day in the Life, over Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, over Lovely Rita. I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest songs of all time, and you have a song like this on your album? No. The animal sounds are annoying. The way John Lennon's vocals are mixed, they're so aggressive and so in your face, you know, and the horns, everything is so all over the place. I simply can't find a single sense of organization in this entire song, so no, it's definitely the lowest point in Sgt. Pepper. Let's move on. And let's move on indeed, because even though we have what probably is the worst song in the band's discography as the lowest point in the album, we have probably the best song in the band's discography as the best song in this album, because A Day in the Life is, in my opinion, a song that's higher than life itself. It's one of the greatest, if not the greatest song ever made, and I mean it. I mean, the experience you go through while listening to A Day in the Life, if you really allow the song to engulf you, is something that I cannot explain with words. It's not only the fact that this song was such a step forward for John Lennon, you know, a man that was fresh out of writing Strawberry Fields Forever and Tomorrow Never Knows. 1967 and 1966 were the best moments for John Lennon as an inventive and creative songwriter, without a doubt. It's also the fact that this signaled the end, in a way, of Paul McCartney's collaboration with John Lennon, because it's so disconnected, you know, it's so disjointed, but it works so well in a way. Before, you'd have both of them singing the same melody to create a harmony, maybe exchanging some lyrics to change certain parts of the song with this other line, you know. Instead, they decided to each have a certain part of the song to themselves, and in the process, they created one of the most incredible experiences music has to offer. In my opinion, is the best way to close one of the most incredible songwriting partnerships in the history of music, and I do believe that even though Sgt. Pepper seems to be falling out of grace in a lot of people's minds, you know, many people are saying that this album is overrated. I'm kind of one of them. I've made quite a few videos on this, and I do believe that this album is way overhyped. I don't feel like this is the greatest achievement in recording history. I do believe that only for having a song like A Day in the Life, you do deserve to be in the podium or in the conversation of being one of the greats, you know, one of the most important albums ever made. There's simply no other option. If we're talking about the best song on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the only reasonable answer is A Day in the Life. I was a little bit confused as to what to do on Magical Mystery Tour, because I thought about only counting the songs for the EP, because technically that's the original track list. You know, all of the songs in the second half are basically non-album singles that were used to patch up an album. But since the album release is seen by the fans as the canon release, I think it would be kind of stupid of me to cut half of the album and make it less interesting just because it wasn't originally intended to be released that way. If that's the case, I feel like the answer is pretty much obvious. is the worst song in the album, even though I enjoy it quite a lot, has to be Your Mother Should Know. I don't think it's a bad song by any means. Actually, it hurts putting it as my least favorite out of the whole album, but you do have a packed track list in Magical Mystery Tour, and since we're not really counting instrumentals or jam sessions, so that means I can't really put Flying as the least favorite song in the album, I have to go with Your Mother Should Know. Not because of any bad qualities the song may or may not have, it's simply because compared to the rest of the album that has songs like Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, Baby You're a Rich Man, I Am the Walrus, Blue Jay Way, this is definitely the lowest point, but still really enjoyable though. And when it comes to the best song, I feel like it cannot be more obvious, because Strawberry Fields Forever is not only the best song in this album, but maybe the best psychedelic song the band ever made. We're talking about a really influential masterpiece, maybe the best song John Lennon ever wrote. That's how incredible this song is. The different tempos, the voice mods, the way that the instrumentation slowly goes out of control, and how it lowers and brings the pitch back up. You know, there's so many things going on when you're listening to this song that it's unbelievable. You know, it's almost inconceivable to think that this song was made in 1967. Truly a massive achievement by the band. It's probably the easiest pick in this entire video, you know, alongside A Day in the Life. Like, some major contributions to the world of music were made by John Lennon in 1967. So yeah, definitely the best moment in the album. Now it's time to go for what in my opinion is the greatest piece of music ever released, the best album ever made, the White Album. Now I thought about this for a while, because in my opinion Revolution Number 9 is not a proper song, so I wasn't going to have it among my options. However, a lot of you, every time I say this, a lot of you go crazy in the comments saying that Revolution Number 9 is a song and it may just be the most incredible song out of the White Album, and you literally do say this. You're not just pulling my leg. Some of you truly believe the Revolution Number 9 is a masterpiece. So I'm going to count it, and guess what? It's the worst song out of the entire album. I don't really know what's attractive about different sounds and tapes and random chords and, you know, John Lennon saying number 9, or whoever that person is saying number 9 over and over again, and then some static. Nothing at all is happening for 8 minutes and 22 seconds, and you honestly do believe that it's the best song in the album. I get that, you know, there's a lot of lore attached to the song, and there's a lot of people that theorize that the Beatles were a satanic cult out of some dude that played the song backwards. I know that there's a lot of theories and little stories about how the song was made, but it doesn't really matter. If the result is not interesting, it doesn't matter how much lore you add to a song. If it's not good, it's not good. You know, context is good when a song is great and you want to make it even better. But when you have a bad song, it doesn't matter how many cool stories and how many pieces of little, you know, stories you want to add to it, it's not going to make the song any better. It's just simply not good. And considering the fact that this was basically the blueprint for their unfinished music trilogy, probably the worst music project John Lennon was ever involved in, I don't really want to know anything about Revolution Number 9 and its disdain, and, you know, what in my opinion is the greatest album ever made. The difficult part is choosing the best song out of this album, because John Lennon has some incredible songs in here, like Happiness is a Warm Gun, Dear Prudence, Julia, in my opinion one of the most personal songs he ever wrote. Paul McCartney was also doing pretty well in this album, Blackbird, Helter Skelter, Mother Nature's Son, I Will, Rocky Raccoon. But in my opinion, if we're talking about individual brilliance, if we're talking about the best song the album has to offer, I feel like George Harrison is the one taking the win with the song Long, Long, Long. I don't know how such a magical and beautiful and incredible masterpiece of a song is so underrated by the fandom of the Beatles. I cannot explain it to myself. You know, I just simply don't understand how so many people overlook the almost religious experience you go through when you listen to the song for the first time, and the incredible feeling of peace and, you know, just relaxation that you get every time you listen to the song after that. And there's no other moment in the White Album that even comes close to the experience of listening to Long, Long, Long. It's simply one of the greatest songs ever made by George Harrison, in my opinion maybe even the best one, including his solo discography, by the way. So I definitely do believe this is the highlight of the White Album for me. And I know that While My Guitar Gently Weeps is also an incredible song, definitely more complete, you know, overall a better song, but we're talking about the best listening experience instead of an album. And if we're talking about the White Album, there's no other moment that comes even close to the beauty of listening to Long, Long, Long. So it's definitely going to be the highlight of the White Album for me. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, because I've said multiple times that the White Album is an album. You know, one of the main reasons why I like it so much is because every song is needed. If you take a single one of those those songs out of the way, it's not going to work as well as it does, but I feel like if I had to pick a moment that impacted me the most, it has to be when I heard Along Long Long for the first time, so it's going to be my favorite one. Now it's time to go for the last album the band made, the last album the band recorded, Abbey Road. This was a little bit confusing because I didn't know if I wanted to include the medley as a single track or if I wanted to include the individual songs that constitute the medley. Ultimately, because the medley is supposed to be a cluster of songs, I don't think that looking at the songs individually will do this video any good, so I'm going to count it as a whole thing, which means that my least favorite song out of the entire album has to fall on Paul McCartney once more with Maxwell's Silver Hammer. This probably explains why Abbey Road is often seen as the best album by the band, because Maxwell's Silver Hammer is actually an incredible track. It's really enjoyable. I think it's the sounds and how he uses the synthesizer. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong, fuck you. It adds this layer of color to the instrumentation that makes it really enjoyable and fun, so even though it's the lowest moment, I feel like that's only a testament of the genius and the greatness of Abbey Road, because the lowest moment in the album is still incredibly enjoyable. And as for the best song in the album, even though I wanted to put I Want You She's So Heavy by John Lennon with every inch of my soul, I have to be honest, overall, because of its relevance, because of its importance, and because of what it meant for George Harrison, I have to go for something. What happens with this song is very similar to what happens with Here, There, and Everywhere. You have a beautiful song, beautifully performed, a beautiful melody, but there's something else. There's something more, something that you can't really put your finger on. You can't explain it, but it's there. This song is one of the most recognizable songs of all time, but it's also very simple. There's nothing that's special about the way the song is built. There's nothing too extravagant about the vocals, about the instrumentation, about the melody of the song. It's something that anyone could have come up with. However, it was George Harrison, and now it's seen as one of the greatest songs of all time. When you go to a song like A Day in the Life, for example, Strawberry Fields Forever, Hey Jude, you can explain your way through the legacy of the song. You can say, okay, the length of the song was definitely a contributing factor, how colorful and strange and all the in-studio experimentation that was used to build the song was definitely a factor. But when it comes to something, there's so very little about how this song was made that it's almost impossible for it to have such a big legacy, alongside songs like Yesterday, Here Comes the Sun, that's also featured on this album, that was a really good candidate for being the best song in this album as well. Along with these songs that are known all over the world, you can sort of explain why those songs were so meaningful to people. I could tell you quite a few things that make this song great, like the guitar solo, the incredible drumming by Ringo Starr, allowing the song to breathe in certain spaces, by minimizing the percussion and adding quite a lot at certain points. I can also tell you that Paul McCartney's backing vocals being so powerful and so direct and so straight and to the point also added this layer of intensity to certain parts of the song to accentuate the romanticism in moments where, it needs that build-up. It's definitely a very well-crafted song, but I could say the same thing about many other songs by the band that don't even have a quarter of the legacy that song has. And the worst thing is, I can't disagree. I really do believe this is the best moment in Abbey Road and maybe the best song George Harrison ever wrote. And now it's time to go for the last album. Not the last album they made, the last album they released. Clouded with Phil Spector's production antics, and we have Let It Be. I feel like the lowest moment in the album is very obvious, especially if you don't count the Maggie May and Dick jam sessions. For Your Blue is probably one of the most confusing moments in the band's discography, not because it's a bad song, but around this time there were rumors that the Beatles were not allowing George Harrison to put all of his songs out there, and songs like All Things Must Pass, Behind That Locked Door, Isn't It a Pity, Not Guilty, songs that are very good. Some of the best songs he ever released as a solo artist were being pitched to John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and allegedly they said no, but they allow a song like For Your Blue. It makes no fucking sense. I mean, this song is very underwhelming. I don't believe that it even deserves to be in this album, considering how many great options they had, including songs made by George Harrison. So I don't really understand why the song is even on the album. Once again, I don't dislike it. I think it's a fine tune, but I feel like it doesn't even feel like a finished song. The instrumental is so bare. If you consider the fact that there's some songs like The Long and Winding Road, Let It Be, Across the Universe, with a lot of overdubs with horns and orchestral arrangements, and then you have a song like this where the only percussion you have is a cowbell, then you definitely have a problem. This is most definitely the lowest moment in Let It Be. But then, as a contrast, you have probably the most beautiful song John Lennon ever wrote from a lyrical point of view, Across the Universe. I know that for a lot of people, Let It Be, I've Got a Feeling, and maybe The Long and Winding Road were the ones that should have been picked as the best songs in the album, but I disagree. I feel like there's very very few moments in John Lennon's discography where you're going to see the man expressing himself as such a vulnerable being, you know, and I don't mean in the sense that, you know, he doesn't put himself down a lot because he has a whole album where he talks about his trauma, but I mean it in a sense that in the song he humbles himself so much through the lyrics in such a poetic way that I can't help but feel attracted to the melody, to the beauty of the choir, you know, and even though it doesn't match John Lennon's style at all, and he actually never tried anything similar to this, I know that he praised Phil Spector's work on this song, and he said that the song was a piece of rubbish, and Phil made it something that's not horrible, that's literally his words. I feel like for once, at least when it comes to the Beatles, Phil Spector was right, because all the arrangements that he added make the song feel much more majestic and, you know, connected to the universe in a way. So yeah, definitely the highlight on Let It Be. And, you know, I feel like a lot of people tend to overrate songs like Let It Be because of how iconic they are and because of how many people know about them. But tell me truly, what moment is more special? Paul McCartney making another ballad, or John Lennon pouring his soul out into the paper and delivering one of the most poetic songs he ever made with a beautiful arrangement behind it? And that is going to be it for today's video. I have to say, I've been recording for way longer than I thought it would be. I didn't know this video was going to be that long, but I'm really happy with my selection of songs, and I'm really excited to see what you guys will have to say about this in the comment section. Remember, I read every single comment, so please go ahead and leave me your opinion on my opinion, and I'll give you my opinion on your opinion if you give me your lists. I truly hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an album, or an artist, leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to check it out and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.